Divine grace. Isi Bhagavatam Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Stota Srimad, His Divine Grace. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakun Radha Kun Giri Govardhan ki. Shri Brindavan Dham ki. Shri Mayapur Navadvip Dham ki. Shri Chaitra Jagannath Puri Dham ki. Ganga Maya ki, Yamuna Maya ki, Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani ki, Harinam Sankirtan ki, Hare Krishna Mahamantra ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru, Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Jnana Tamarandhyasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha. Hey Krishna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Vishubhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namaste Girirajaya Shri Govardhana Namane Ashesha Kleshana Shaya Paramananda Daine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mareka Bandhu Matsangin Madguru Manmadana Madnistaraka Madbhagya Madananda Namostute Asaru Saru Tadayana Tinicho Tatakara Anamuncha Karachin Mam Premna Hitkatayos Purat Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritta Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devyam Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nastapreshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttama Shloke Bhakti Bhavati Naishtaki. Hare Krishna, everybody. Hare Krishna Lakshmi Kanta Prabhu. Welcome to Tucson. My good friend from Sedona. Always happy to see him. He's always enthusiastically hearing and chanting about Krishna and worshiping the deities. cooking for Krishna at all times, working for Krishna. Happy you have your association, Prabhu. Okay. Today we'll be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Creation of the Fourth Order, chapter number 28. Paranjana becomes a woman in his next life. Text number 53. Api smarasi chadmanam avigyata sakam sake hitva mam param anvinchan bhama bhoga rato gata api smarsi chatmanam avigyata sakam sake hitva mam param anvinchan bhama bhoga rato gata api smarsi chatmanam avigyata sakam sake hitva mam param anvinchan bhama bhoga rato gata. You chant. Api smarasi chatmanam avigata sakam sake hitva mam param anvinchan bhama bhoga rata gata. Api smarasi chatmanam avigyata sakam sake hitva mam param anvinchan bhama bhoga rato gata. Api smarasi chatmanam avigyata sakam sake hitva mam param anvinchan bhama bhoga rato gata. Okay, word for word, please. Api smarasi. Do you remember? Cha. Also. Atmanam. The super soul. Avigyata. Unknown. Sakam. Friend. Sake. Oh, friend. Hitwa. Giving up. Mam. Me. Param. Position. Anvichan. Desiring. Bhauma. Material. Bhoga. Enjoyment. Rataha. Attached to. Gataha. You became. Translation. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. The Brahmana continued, my dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend? Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position as enjoyer of this material world. Please repeat. The Brahmana continued, my dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend? Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position as enjoyer of this material world. Purport. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 7:27, Ichadvesha samutena dvandva mohena bharata sarvabhutani samoham sargayanti pranatapa. O sign of Bharata, Arjuna, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. This is an explanation of how the living entity falls down into this material world. In the spiritual world, there is no duality, nor is there hate. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expands himself into many. In order to enjoy bliss more and more, the Supreme Lord expands himself in different categories. As mentioned in the Raha Purana, he expands himself in Vishnu Tattva, the Shwamsha expansion, and in his marginal potency, the Vivanamsha, or living entity. These expanded living entities are innumerable, just as the minute molecules of sunshine are innumerable expansions of the sun. The Vivanamsha expansion, the marginal potencies of the Lord, are the living entities. When living entities desire to enjoy themselves, they develop a consciousness of duality and come to hate the service of the Lord. In this way, the living entity fall into the material world. In the Prema Vivarta, it is said, Krishna Bahir Mukhahana Bhoga Vanchakare Nikatastamai Tare Japati Adare. The natural position of the living entity is to serve the Lord in a transcendental, loving attitude. When the living entity wants to become Krishna himself or imitate Krishna, he falls into the material world. Since Krishna is the Supreme Father, his affection for the living entity is eternal. The living entity falls into the material world. The Supreme Lord, through his Shwamsha expansion, Paramatma, keeps company with the living entity. In this way, the living entity may someday return back home, back to Godhead. By misusing his independence, the living entity falls down from the service of the Lord and takes a position in this material world as an enjoyer. That is to say, the living entity takes his position within a material body. Wanting to take an exalted position, the living entity instead becomes entangled in repetition of birth and death. He selects his position as a human being, a demigod, a cat, dog, or tree. In this way, the living entity selects a body out of 8,400,000 forms and tries to satisfy himself by a variety of material enjoyment. The Supersoul does not like him to do this. Consequently, the Supersoul instructs him to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord then takes charge of the living entity. But unless the living entity is uncontaminated by material desires, he cannot surrender to the Supreme Lord. Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says, Bhoktaram yagitapasam sarvalokameshvaram sridam sarvabhutanam yatamam shantim richati. Sages knowing me is the ultimate purpose of all sacrifices and austerities, the Supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pains of material miseries. Supreme Lord is the supreme friend of everyone. However, no one can take advantage of the Supreme Friend's instructions while making his own plans to become happy and entangle himself in the modes of material nature. When there is creation, the living entities take on different forms according to past desires. This means that all the species or forms of life are simultaneously created. Darwin's theory, stating that no human being existed from the beginning, but that humans evolved after many, many years, is simply a nonsensical theory. From Vedic literature, we find that the first creature within the universe, Lord Brahma, being the most intelligent personality, Lord Brahma can take charge of creating all the varieties found within this material world. Srila Prabhupada Ki. Yeah. Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswate Devi Vani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shanyavadi Pastachadesha Tadadane. Translation one more time. The Brahmin continued, My dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend? Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position as enjoyer of this material world. I'm grateful to speak today. Again, every day in Krishna consciousness is a realization of how unqualified we are to speak on Bhagavatam. You hear about the real qualities of someone who speaks on Bhagavatam. So we're purifying ourselves by speaking. I feel very fortunate to give class on this verse particularly. This is one of my spiritual master's favorite verses. He's very much a fan of this particular section of the Bhagavatam because it deals with the reason the soul comes to the material world, and it also deals with the way in which Krishna deals with the soul who's come to the material world. And that's a very insightful a realization. So this verse is often cited as a way to defeat the theory that the living entities originate in the material world or originate in the Brahma Jyoti. It's very much common in India and just around ISKCON. You find some who are of the opinion that the living entities do not originate in Krishna. And this is a nonsensical theory. According to the instructions of Srila Prabhupada, there are many acharyas who say different things, but as followers of Prabhupada and as people who have faith in Prabhupada, I take what he says at face value. That Srila Prabhupada says the living entities have come from the spiritual world with Krishna and are returning back to the spiritual world. And so this verse is often quoted. When I was in Dallas, His Holiness Hridayananda Maharaj was very strongly preaching against this theory with these verses. And at one point, someone asked a challenging question. He became very fired up. He said, "Can't you read?" And it was very funny. So anyhow, it's often used, but all complicated theology aside, there is a practical reality to this verse. We can speculate and try to conceptualize the complicated theology of the spiritual world of Goloka Vrindavan and Vaikuntha and the Brahma Jyoti material world and Mahavishnu. And we accept all those things as facts as we hear them in the scriptures, but our experience is very limited. Rather, we can experience the taste of chanting Hare Krishna. We can experience, prasadam. We can experience those realizations which Krishna allows us to experience, with the hope that at some point we'll be able to perceive the entire reality. Atashri Krishna namari nabhavet viremindriyai sevam mukhe hijivadao swayameva svarat yadaha. It's described in the Padma Purana, but also quoted by Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Samrita Sindhu, that we cannot understand Krishna. Atashri Krishna namadi, that Krishna's name and namadi, his name, fame, pastimes, qualities, form, they're not able to be understood by the living entity in the material world. Atashri Krishna namadi, nabhaved graham indirai, not by the senses or the mind. But sevan mukhe hijivadao, by rendering service, sevan mukhe, with the tongue, hijivadao, one can begin to understand these things. Swayameva svarat yadaha, they become revealed to one. And specifically the chanting of Hare Krishna and the tasting of Krishna prasadam and the speaking of Srimad Bhagavatam, by these activities, one can begin to understand this theology, which is more or less conceptual for us at the lower levels. But there is a practical reality to this statement that the living entity has come from Krishna and is living in the material world. Just on a practical level, the living entities are all forgetting Krishna. We can observe that when we go out onto the streets, when we go out into nature, when we go out just walking around Tucson. You can see that the general mass of people are not conscious of God, and they're not conscious of God. Rather, they are conscious of their own senses, and they are making plans and living and doing activities to fulfill the desires of the senses. And we understand by factual experience and by observation that they're not happy because sense gratification is not satisfying. However, when one becomes conscious of God and begins to live a life in God consciousness, at that stage one can see that they're living with Krishna. It's practical reality. So it's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam that there are two reasons for the material world's existence. One of them is the fulfillment of material desires. Krishna is so kind that the living entity who is desirous of forgetting him is provided a facility by which he can fulfill his material desires. From the level of Brahma down to the level of an ant, all material desires are provided for by the Lord if one wants to fulfill those desires. And that's the kindness of the Lord. And on the other side of things, the Lord is creating the material world in such a way that the living entity will become frustrated and desire to come back home, back to Godhead. And in the proper context of Vedic society, living entity is able to perform kama, artha, dharma, and moksha all in one go, because by following the Vedas, one is gradually purified to the point of coming to pure devotional service. This is the prescribed process. So there are different ways by which we can fulfill our material desires. We can fulfill our material desires in a pious way, like through the Vedas and through the various scriptures, or we can fulfill our material desires in a sinful way by not abiding in the rules and regulations of the Vedas. But in any case, the fulfillment of material desires is a form of ignorance. Of course, Krishna says we should transcend the Vedas because they're mostly dealing with the three modes of material nature. But there are facilities and formulas offered in the Vedas to enjoy material facilities. The most common we see is marriage, is a facility given in the Vedas to enjoy, to allow for some sense gratification. And there's so many other things. There's the sacrifice of the goat, the goddess Kali, for the meat eating and different things for those who want to engage in these types of activities. However, the Bhagavatam, being Dharma Projito Kaitavot or Paramo Niramatsaranam Satam, completely rejects these materialistic activities and propounds the highest truth, which is reality distinguished from illusion for the benefit of all, and which completely uproots the threefold miseries of material life. So the Bhagavatam is presenting Shuddha Bhakti, or pure devotional service. And it's very, very forthright in this, Yehi Shamsparsha Jaboga Dukkha Yonya Evate Adiyatavanta Konte Aditesha Rimate Buddha, that this material enjoyment is not something that is relished by the wise, the self-realized, because it is dukkha yonya evate. It's the womb of misery. All right, yoni means womb, dukkha means misery. Dukkha yonya evate. So the material enjoyment that's offered by the world, by Maya, is the womb of misery. So the more we engage in material enjoyment, the more we're entering the womb of misery, and we're creating karma, we're creating all kinds of different miseries for ourselves. However, because of our position, many times we're unable to completely cut off this material enjoyment. Therefore, Krishna gives us a facility by which we can use our guna and karma in his service. Bhakti yoga is the saving grace that one who does bhakti can use all these facilities in Krishna's service by offering them to the Lord. I was just hearing the Krishna book, beautiful prayers of the gopis to Krishna at Kurukshetra. The various cowherd girls were speaking to Krishna. And they were explaining, Prabhupada was explaining that actually a pure devotee doesn't see anything separate from Krishna. He doesn't see anything in this universe separate from Krishna. And therefore, the pure devotee can be blessed with all material facility and still remain a pure devotee because he's using everything purely in Krishna's service. And of course, that's where the distinction is drawn between, these great Raj Rishis, and we see in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes the householders, and you see about Pundrik Vidyaniti. Pundrik Vidyaniti was seemingly extraordinarily opulent devotee, and when Mukunda Datta was taking Gadadhar Pandit to see Pundrik Vidyaniti, he was saying, this is one very wonderful devotee, pure devotee. And when Gadadhar Pandit saw that Pundrik Vidyaniti was very opulent with jewelry and very nice silks, and he had oil in his hair, and he was chewing pan, Gadadhar said, what kind of devotee is this? And then Mukunda Datta kind of gave him a sarcastic smile, and he said, Aho Bhakiyan Stanakala Kutam Jigham Shayapaya Yadapya Sadvi Ebe Gatim Datrititam Tatonyam Ebe Kamba Dayalum Sharanam Brajema. He quoted this verse from the Bhagavatam, which is saying that who can I take shelter of who's more merciful than he who gave the position of a mother to the she-witch, Putana, who came with a breast covered in poison to kill him, yet he gave her the position of mother. And upon hearing that, Pundrik Vidyaniti fell off of his throne and started spasming and went into a trance for many hours. And so at that point, Gadadhar Pandit can see that, yes, this is a great devotee of the Lord. And I've actually made an offense by considering him not a devotee. I judged him by his external character. And so Gadadhar Pandit decided I'm going to take initiation from him and became initiated by Pundrik Vidyaniti. And Lord Chaitanya is called Pundrik Vidiniti Father. He's very, very elevated soul. So we can't judge, but generally material facilities are the womb of misery because we're not so advanced like Pundrik Vidiniti or Advaita Acharya or Srivastava Kaur that we can maintain material facilities and still be fixed in our Krishna consciousness. So it's described by Krishna or by Lord Chaitanya that when a neophyte devotee is very sincerely serving Krishna, but at the same time has material desires, Krishna never fulfills those material desires. Because the sincerity is there, but the advancement is not there. So when one becomes seriously advanced in Krishna consciousness, like the devotees aforementioned, then Krishna can provide material facility, but such devotees don't fall down. And of course, the quintessential example is Maharaj Ambarish, who was extraordinarily opulent, but rather used everything for Krishna because his attachment was not to sense gratification. His attachment was to Krishna. And thus the bhakti process is highlighted by these great kings who apparently had material enjoyment. The bhakti process is highlighted because of their attachment being to hearing and chanting. Right? When the attachment is to hearing and chanting, rather than the material facilities could be there. However, I'm attached to hearing and chanting. This is my focal point, of my life, that I'm always going to hear, I'm always going to chant. And so in that way, such a devotee who is thoroughly fixed in hearing and chanting, he can be unfazed by the material energy. So in either case, whether we're trying to fulfill material desires sinfully, we're trying to fulfill material desires piously, or we're trying to go back to Godhead and be pure devotees, Krishna is helping us because we, as explained in this verse by Prabhupada, we've come to the material world, but Krishna, out of his kindness, comes in the form of the super soul. But in either case, Krishna is helping us because the living entity wants to feel like God. And we understand prakriti kriyamanani guna karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudatma kartahamiti manyate. The living entity, bewildered by false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality performed by the modes of material nature. So this is the ahankara, which is making us think we're God. Whether we're thinking I'm God, I'm the supreme controller, or we're just trying to lord it over anything in this material world. People want to lord over their dog. They want to lord over their cat. They want to lord over their family. They want to lord over their husband or their wife. And they want to lord over their children. So in some way, we want to lord over something. We want to lord over our little room in the ashram, whatever it may be. So this is the ahamamiti, right? This is the concept, the false ego, I and mine. So the living entity, bewildered by false ego, becomes covered by Maya. Super soul allows the living entity to be covered by Maya, and then to enjoy and think himself the doer. And based on his karma, he may be thinking I'm King Indra, I'm the supreme controller, I'm Brahma. Even Brahma became bewildered by false ego, right? He saw Krishna playing with the cowherd boys, and he decided that I'm going to, test if this is really, person's really more powerful than me. Of course, Krishna bamboozled him by his mystic potencies. So that's the material world, that when we're under the modes of material nature, by the influence of false ego, we're thinking we're the doer, and super soul is allowing us to think that. But actually, who's doing? Upadrasta anumantascha bhakta bhokta maheshvara paramatmeti chapyukto deisman purusha paraha. Krishna is explaining in this body, dehisman purusha paraha. There's a parapurusha. There's a purusha. The purusha you're trying to enjoy, and then there's parapurusha. There's the supreme enjoyer, right? Dehisman purusha paraha. Paramatmeti chapyukto. He's known as the super soul, and he exists as upadrasta anumantascha bhakta bhokta maheshvara. The overseer, the permitter, the master, the enjoyer, and the supreme controller. That's super soul's position. He's overseeing everything you're doing, and he's also permitting it. The fact that I'm moving my hands and I'm speaking and that I'm doing anything, I'm breathing, I'm going to the bathroom, closing my eyes, opening my eyes, all of that is supervised and authorized by super soul. And if Krishna decides he can completely cut the authorization off, boom, you're paralyzed. Boom, your life is gone. Right? Krishna is the upadrasta, nimantascha, bharta, bhokta, maheshvara. He's the bharta, he's the master, he's the bhokta. He's actually enjoying. We think we're enjoying, but Krishna is actually enjoying. And he's the maheshvara, he's the supreme controller. So in that way, we're not the doer, we're the desirer. We think we're doing that, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But actually we're desiring to do this and we're desiring to do that. And out of Krishna's kindness, in accordance with our karma, Krishna is arranging everything in the universe to fulfill that desire. This is the process by which the super soul is working. So this is for a living entity who is not surrendered to super soul, right? That we've turned our back to super soul. And just most common example given by Prabhupada so many times is 2 birds in a tree. You have the one bird is sitting in the tree, observing and peacefully observing, and the other bird is trying to enjoy the fruits of the tree. But until we turn to the bird that's peacefully sitting, until we turn to super soul, we're always enjoying these fruits, and each fruit has its own sweetness and its own pain, and therefore we're. The next verse after that, Purusha prakriti stohi bhakte prakriti jangunan karanam guna sango sad syada sad yoni janmashu. It's described by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita that Purusha prakriti stohi, that the living entity situated in the material world, Purusha prakriti stohi here, bhakte prakriti jangunan. He's enjoying the material nature, various facilities that are jangunan. They're born from the modes of material nature. Therefore, we're enjoying all the facilities born of the modes of material nature, right? What are those? We're enjoying the different frolickings of the mode of passion, right? Between making money and going and having physical enjoyment and the opposite sex. And the mode of goodness, we're enjoying the sense of knowledge and peace and feeling we're better than everybody else because we're in the mode of goodness. In the mode of ignorance, people are enjoying intoxication and sleep and madness and illusion, sitting all day watching nonsense on their phones or on their televisions. So in this way, someone's enjoying the mode of ignorance. So, however, because of that, how do we get to that position? Karanam guna sangosya, because we're associating with those modes. So you want to change your position. If we find ourselves stuck in a position of lower dimensional enjoyment, right? We're stuck. Therefore, we have to associate with those who are not doing that, right? And so it's a simple thing, but it takes humility to see that this devotee is advanced and is very fixed in hearing and chanting. Therefore, let me associate with them so then I will become advanced in hearing and chanting. Let me associate with Srimad Bhagavatam. Let me create a space in my room or my house that is facilitating mode of goodness, because when the space is in the mode of goodness, our activities are going to facilitate mode of goodness. When our space is in the mode of ignorance, our facilities are going to facilitate mode of ignorance, mode of passion, right? So in that way, the atmosphere is affecting us. So we can engineer our lives in that way, based on our desire. So in that way, living entity sada sad yoni janmashu, he's taking various births from good and evil wombs. Sad, asa, yoni, janmashu, different births in good and evil wombs. In this way, we're perpetually going from birth to birth to birth. So then on the other side of things, the devotee, we've spoken about the materialist, he who's under the influence of false ego. On the other side of things, there's the devotee, who is also being helped by the super soul, but the difference is the devotee has turned to the super soul. Mahatmanas timam partha, daivim prakritim ashritaha, right? The living entity, the Mahatmas, or the great souls, they're taking shelter, daivim prakritim ashritaha, they're taking shelter of the divine energy of Krishna. They're under the internal energy, they're under the protection of the divine Shakti, Radharani, and the devotional energy. And they understand Krishna's position. They understand who Krishna is. They understand Krishna's position as the supreme enjoyer, original personality, absolute and infallible. And therefore, such living entities are also under the control of the super soul. But the difference is that they're surrendered, right? This surrender, rather they've surrendered their own desires, their own plans for material enjoyment, and have given their will to the supersoul. Let me give my free will, which I have complete freedom over. When that free will, when I say, my dear Lord, my dear Sri Sri Radhamadava, please take my free will. Please let my free will be your will, right? That's one of the elements of surrender. And let me not desire anything. Let me have no separate interest of that of Krishna. So what is Krishna's interest? And that's the funny thing, is that it's, if you really open yourself up to that, it's scary how Krishna tells you what he wants you to do. And then you start to see the fact that I don't want to do it. The material energy faces you. All of a sudden, I know what Krishna wants. He wants me to work hard and surrender and give up all facilities for sense gratification and so many things. I don't want to do it. That's what Maya does, right? I'm not ready for that. But nonetheless, Krishna still always is helping us if we're attached to him by hearing and chanting. We'll come to that level. But anyhow, when we say that full surrender is, my dear Lord, I'm yours. I just, as Draupadi was being derobed, right, trying to fight, and she was holding with both hands. They were tearing her sari off, and she was holding with one hand, and she was holding with two hands, and she was still holding with her teeth. And finally she let go, and she said, "Hey, Govinda. Hey, Yadava." And then Krishna came. So we're always fighting. Prabhupada's father used to tell Prabhupada that Krishna has many hands. He has unlimited hands. And if he decides to take things from you, there's no way you can stop him. But if he decides to give things to you, you can't hold all he's wanting to give to you. So rather than try to make our own plans, as Prabhupada nicely says in this purport here, the Supreme Lord is the supreme friend of everyone. However, no one can take advantage of the Supreme Friend's instructions while making his own plans to become happy, entangling himself in the modes of material nature. So what is the reason we know this? We're devotees, and so we know this, but why do we continuously still make plans? Because we don't have faith in Krishna. That's the big fear. We don't want to surrender because we don't have full faith that if we do surrender, Super Soul will provide everything that we need. Of course, we'll have more than we imagined. And so we accept that, right, lead role in the cage, rather than our walk-on part in the war, quote Pink Floyd. Or we can be instruments of Krishna's love. We can be instrument of Krishna's peace. We can do some valuable service to Srila Prabhupada if we surrender. And we know that Krishna's providing for all the living entities, and he knows what's best. And we may find ourselves in a position we don't like, in a position we like, or we like the position at one time, we don't like it at another time. However, Krishna will change our position according to his will. Rather, let me not make my own plans and act on them. Let me do the service that Krishna puts in front of me. That's our real business. Because Krishna will give us service. We're chanting Hare Krishna. We're asking for service. Krishna is giving us service. And let me do what he puts in front of me with full enthusiasm. And let me only desire that I just serve him, and I just be his surrendered devotee. And follow Super Soul in that way. So this is how we surrender to Super Soul. And so in simple terms, our will should be God's will. That's it. Our will should be God's will. And thus we let it go, right? They say in the Protestant world, let go and let God. It's real. It's a real thing, Let it go and let Krishna take control of our lives. And the only guarantee that we have there is that we'll have a wonderful life. And so when I was just becoming a devotee, when I was just speaking with Govinda Datta Prabhu as I was becoming a devotee, one time one of the things he said to me was, we don't give up anything but suffering, actually. I think Jadway Maharaj, there's one story too where he was walking down New York and someone asked him, what do you give up? What did you give up to do what you do? And he just said, I've only given up suffering. So we're not giving up any But the reason we're suffering, I'm giving up everything. I'm living in the temple. I have an austere life, right? Someone can say, well, you're still holding on to that enjoyment. That's our problem. We haven't actually given it up. We're still holding on to it in our mind. And therefore we're suffering worse than rather suffering like anything. So how do we give it up? It's very difficult. Very difficult. But we can give it up by proper means, right? By following proper means, detachment, practicing Krishna consciousness, and rather giving it to Krishna. Krishna, like in the Bible, of course, it says that, God put those desires, God knows your desires, and Krishna fulfills all desires. So, akama sarvakama va moksha kama dhardi tivrena bhakti yogena yajita purusha param. Whether one's akama, he has no desire, he's sarvakama, he has all desire, or he's moksha kama, he desires liberation. Man with broad-minded intelligence should full-heartedly and wholeheartedly worship the original person, the supreme source, Krishna. So, therefore, let me emphasis on that, wholeheartedly worship Krishna. I have material desires, but I'm going to worship Krishna with full surrender, and I'm giving it all to him. He can take them away. Lord Nityananda only has to glance at us to take away our material desire. So one example I was thinking of in the Bhagavatam that's given of this, the way that this internal and external energy works and how the super soul is arranging everything, is that once in the hall, in the court of King Dhritarashtra, the well-wishing friend and pure devotee Mahabhagavat Vidura entered that court, and he began to instruct his brother. This is before Vidura went on pilgrimage, and he said, "You are maintaining offense personified in the form of your son Duryodhana. Such a son is useless and will bring destruction to our dynasty, for he has offended the Lord and his pure devotees. Therefore you should, cut him off as one cuts off an infected limb." And Vidura is speaking very heavily to his brother. But unbeknownst to Vidura, Duryodhana was listening. So Duryodhana came in and he spoke very insulting words to Vidura, that you're a Sudra, you're born of a Sudra mother, and therefore you don't even belong here. And so he insulted Vidura. And Vidura left, right? He left. And so it's described in the Shastras and by our Acharyas at that point that Vidura, he felt, he of course was an associate of Krishna. And Vidura was incredibly dear to Krishna. In fact, so much so that as Krishna was exiting the material world, he was thinking of Vidura. But it's described that as Vidura was leaving, he felt himself too contaminated to go approach Krishna. So he went on pilgrimage to purify himself. But because he was a devotee, the internal energy was working on him. At that very moment, the internal energy was working on Vidura for his ultimate liberation and for the liberation of Dhritarashtra and for the speaking of the Srimad Bhagavatam by Maitreya Muni and Uddhava. And the external energy was working on Duryodhana as he was offending Vidura and he was offending Krishna. The external energy was working upon him. And so in one way, the super soul is working for Vidura's ultimate liberation, and the other way, it's working for Duryodhana's ultimate destruction. Simply because Vidura was fully surrendered to the will of Krishna. So let us not make our own plans. Rather, we should surrender them. Sarvadharman purityaja mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayami masucha. Rather, we should surrender them to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Abandon all varieties of religion, abandon all dharmas, and make Krishna number one. Make him the ultimate goal of life. Not easy, folks. We have to, it doesn't come like, it's not a sacrifice, it's alchemy, it's I'm giving something to get this spiritual thing. And we have to have faith that do not fear, Krishna says, right? Do not fear. I'm surrendering to you without fear. That I have faith that you're going to do what's best for me. And that's scary. That's scary in reality, right? It's not so easy to have that faith that I'm going to full-heartedly do this, and I have to have faith that I know what you're going to do is best. But he doesn't make it so easy because he's wanting to test that. That's what a real sadhu is. Surrendered, fully surrendered to Krishna. Such a person's a sadhu. Why? Mayananyena bhavena bhaktim kurvanti yedudam mat krite twaktva kamanas twaktva swajana bandhavaha. Because they've given up for Krishna. Mayananyena bhavena bhaktim kurvanti yedudam, with a vow of performing serious devotional service. Such a sadhu, mat krite, for my sake, twaktva kamanas, abandons all materialistic activities. Twaktva swajana, abandons all mundane familial connections. Twaktva swabandhavaha, abandons all mundane materialistic friendships for my sake. Rather, what does he do? Satam prasangam amavirya sambado vanti hritkarna rasayana kataha. He engages in the process of hearing and chanting with pure devotees, which is pleasing to the ear and to the heart. Taj josanat asapavarga vartmani, and which opens the doors to liberation. Shraddha ratir bhaktir anukramishati. And in that association of pure devotees, abandoning such materialistic association for the association of pure devotees, Shraddha, one develops faith in Krishna. Shraddha ratir, one develops attachment for Krishna. Shraddha ratir bhaktir anukramishati, and he develops love for me. This is the process. This is the process. So, surrendering to super souls in the beginning, surrendering to Krishna. So how do we do it in the very beginning? Tadviri pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshana. Just learn the truth by approaching a bona fide spiritual master. Render service unto him and humbly. Such self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they've seen the truth. Tattvadarshana. They've seen the truth. Therefore, they can show you the truth, which is devotional service. How do they do that? It's not that they tap you on the head. They speak and they give you service. This is the key. That the true guru is a representative of the super soul. Why? Because he is surrendered to the super soul, you see. His will and Krishna's will are one. Therefore, Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And such a person can give you service. We can do karma yoga all day long. I'm doing this, yat karosi yadashnasi yaj jahosi dadasi yat. Whatever I do for Krishna. I give the fruits to Krishna. That's very nice. Rather, what does Krishna want me to do? What does Krishna want me to do? What does Guru want me to do? What the Guru wants, what the Guru's order. That's the active principle in the disciple's life. Right? Prabhupada says, the active principle in the disciple's life. Therefore, we hear the famous verse, whoever has faith, implicit faith in the spiritual master and the Guru, Yasya Devi Parabhaktir, Yata Devi Tataguru. To such a person, all the imports of Vedic knowledge are revealed. If we have that faith in the order of the Guru. And there's the result, right? Yajgita na punar moham. Never again will you fall into such illusion. Yajgita na punar moham. No more illusion. Evam yasi pandava. Yena bhutan yasheshani drakshash yatman yato mahi. Rather, you'll see that all living entities are part of the Supreme. Or in other words, drakshash atman yoma. That all living entities belong to me. And in that's the state of perfect vision. I see all the living entities as part and parcel of Krishna. Because I've properly engaged in the service of Krishna by following the orders of the spiritual master. And as we're hearing in this verse, my dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend? Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position as enjoyer of this material world. That's the Guru. It's a super soul in the form of a Brahmana. But the super soul and the Guru, they're non-different, right? That you've given up my association to enjoy. You've given up my order, but I'm your friend, ever well-wisher. Prabhupada said, I'm your ever well-wisher. So Krishna is our ever well-wisher, and anybody who's representing Krishna is our ever well-wisher by thoroughly encouraging us in Krishna consciousness. So Therefore, we should remember that intimate friend and take to his instruction. All the devotees, all the Shiksha and Diksha Guru, they're representatives of Krishna. Hear and chant and try to serve this mission of Prabhupada. In that way, all perfection is available. Any questions or comments? Rohita? Priya Devi Dasa?
Sometimes it's really difficult to inspire people or convince people that they're actually giving up suffering instead of enjoyment. And so I was just wondering, we see this all the time. People come and they're very enthusiastic, but they just cannot get over the idea that they're missing out, on certain kinds of enjoyment. And so I guess my question is what are some ways that we can inspire people, that are not really convinced that, that they're giving up suffering?
Well, I don't know if I'm fully convinced yet. So it's a big problem. Certainly I'm not. So we have to engage in the process. Mm-hmm. We have to engage in the process. And the more we, in my experience, the more we express, thank you, Prabhu. The more that we express devotional service, the more that we express the happiness of devotional service, it's inspiring to people. We can be the best devotees we can be. Then we can convince them that, when you see a devotee who has given up material enjoyment and appears happier than any other person I've ever come across, that's pretty convincing. In fact, that's what plays with your mind. That's what really played with my mind. It's like, all the things that I'm aspiring for, you've given up and you're happier than I am. That was a big, kind of jar for me. And that's pretty convincing in itself. But, sometimes thank you so much, Prabhu. Very kind of you. But also, we have to somehow or another bring people into the process of hearing enough, hearing. If you don't hear Bhagavatam, I don't see how it's possible to surrender to Krishna. If you hear Bhagavatam every day, it's kind of like, it's almost painful because it's, you know that the material enjoyment is being torn away from you. It's being torn away every day. We're hearing this stuff. And you're seeing, like Ganga explains how he went, when he met the devotees, he read the books and he went to the beach and he was like, why did it have to come now? I'm in California. I think I've experienced that too, but that's the reality. And so sometimes you can't convince people. Bhogashvarya prashaktanam te parita chetasam vivasyatmika buddhi samudana vidite. Sometimes they're bewildered by Bhogashvarya, by opulence and enjoyment. And therefore they have the resolute determination to perform devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place in such a person. So give him prasadam. It's like the virus, you put in the system to disrupt the. Yeah. Anybody else have a question?
In the early days, Prabhupada used to say, for all of us that were joining, he used to say, take so much prasadam that you can't even stand up. So we can, encourage people, eat. It costs us money, but, Prabhupada said it's our secret weapon.
I've seen it work, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it work. Okay, wait, the last one.
I just want, on that point, I work in the restaurant a lot, and I have for the last 5 years. And I can see the effect that prasadam has on people. And I was writing a paper for the GBC College, and I mentioned that, you know, that pretty much when you ask people like local devotees, you know, oh, how did you become a devotee? A huge percentage of them say, well, I started coming to the restaurant, I started, you know, eating the prasadam, and suddenly after a while I was interested in what else was going on, and it came to a program, and then that's all she wrote, you know. So I mean, that's like the same story I hear from a huge percentage of people around here. So
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we've seen it. You know, that someone takes prasadam, they become devotees. They become devotees of prasadam, and it's just that purification that takes place in eating prasadam. It's unbelievable. That's all we got. That's all I got, really, is prasadam. We got our things. You know, we got prasadam. We got hearing and chanting. You know, like that's really all we have. Hearing and chanting. Hearing counts philosophy. Hearing philosophy. You know, if we don't take that seriously, there's nothing. But if we take that seriously, like nothing can touch us, no matter where we're at. Hearing and chanting. It's like our Lakshmi Kant Prabhu is always hearing and chanting very enthusiastically, very loudly, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam class, blasting it through the house, purifying the neighborhood.
and I also remember when we stay at your house, you're always encouraging us to give class.
He always wants us to give class, hear, chant, always worshiping his deities with great enthusiasm. So very fired. That's why this morning you're fired up, dancing. We appreciate that. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki. Srimad Bhagavatam ki.